Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Season 2 content of the War Within expansion brings with it a ton of different class changes and revamps, offering a lot of build variety for so many different playstyles, basically all but essentially one, the class of Rogue, which is my current main. And at first things were looking kind of gloomy and grim for the class of Rogue, as it wasn't getting a lot of variety going forward, but it looks like Rogues actually do have a viable build that's doing really well within Mythic Plus content. Outlaw Rogues finally can play the spec of Trickster, the hero spec that saw very little to no play in Season 1, but it's actually looking to make a pretty hefty turnaround for Season 2. And the amount of damage this build could put out right now is actually kind of impressive. After getting all of the items I needed to properly give it a go, I wanted to put together a small guide in order to show you how to start playing Outlaw as Trickster yourself for the Season 2 dungeons within War Within. And while right now it is still very difficult to tell if the Outlaw will be a meta class, as meta doesn't really get to stabilize up until a couple of first few weeks into a brand new season, as everybody gets geared and starts to push past their limits within some of the highest dungeons out there. But this early version of Outlaw is actually doing some early pushes, and it's actually looking kind of promising. This video, however, will not cover the basics of Outlaw Rogue. I've already done that in a guide video, which you'll find in the description of this one, or in a written version of the guide over on our Discord channel, so definitely check it out if you're still in the basics of Outlaw Rogue. This build in this video will primarily focus on the Mythic Plus variation of this Trickster playstyle and how to play it optimally within M Plus content. As always, if you guys want to get more regular updates for the War Within Patch 11.1 Season 2 content, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. If you're looking for a proper just starter guide for Outlaw Rogue in Season 2, we did post one not long ago, actually just the other day, based on, depends when you watch this video. So you can actually find that guide if you just need the very basics of Outlaw Rogue and how to pick it up and play it in Season 2 War Within. I have that video linked down in the description. We also have a guide, a written version of a guide in our Discord channel, so you can pull that up as well if you just like the more visual version rather than the video version, just something to read rather than to watch and listen to. So you could get a guide either way, and it goes over some of the basics and chants and things like that. I don't necessarily want this guide to be more of a basics coverage, but rather a specific build for Outlaw Rogues that are more or less familiar with the playstyle and the spec. That being Trickster with an AoE content, which is finally viable after a whole season of Season 1 where Trickster wasn't really getting a lot of play. I guess if you want to be generous, you could say some players enjoyed it within PvP content in some situations, but predominantly you were Fatebound for the most part. Fatebound was just way too good for a good bit. With the buffs to Trickster with some of the other challenges that got buffed up, it is a lot better, it is a lot more viable, and there's a couple of different variations of builds that you can play into. There's the Keep It Rolling build, which is the default build. It plays around the main ability of Keep It Rolling. With the new tiers that we play into, this is a slightly better build. It's about 5 to 8% ahead of the Ambush variation, which they're both like pretty close, and if you just like the Ambush version, if you want to, because it's technically a little easier, you could play it. But as long as if you are trying to be the best damage out there, or trying to output the best damage out there that you can, as long as you have between 16 to 20% haste, then you're viable to start playing the Keep It Rolling variation of the Outlaw Rogue within Mythic Plus. And I'll have this build, but also the Ambush variation linked down below in the description, but also in our written guide as well. The Ambush variation trades out a couple of talents. It doesn't play to Keep It Rolling. Instead of picking up the Audacity as well as Hidden Opportunity for Ambush playstyles, it also goes, instead of Supercharger, it goes into 2 points of Vigor for energy regen and max energy, plus 1 point lethality. Good as being pretty good for the Ambush playstyle. Ambushes do quite a decent bit of damage on their own, and when they crit with this build, if you are low in haste, you'll want to refunnel that all into crit instead. The more crit damage you have, the more output you can do as the Ambush Outlaw variation. For either build, there are some variations that you can take with your talents. If you want to pick up Shift for a little bit more utility, or maybe if you want to try the Wound Poison for enemies that heal, maybe pick up a little bit more utility for movement speed, you can drop either Shadow Heart or Featherfoot or Iron Stomach. I usually just drop Shadow Heart or Iron Stomach to pick up Shiv. Shadow Heart also works if you're looking for a little bit less survivability, because you spend a lot of time in stealth with a whole without a trace playstyle. So that is a variation of Rogue that you can make for some utility in the class talent tree. In the spec talent tree, there isn't too much. Outlaw is still a hard-capped AoE spec. You can only cleave 7 additional targets outside of your first one, which is unfortunate because there's quite a bit of AoE pulls. Even then, while Outlaw is hard-capped on AoE, it still tends to do decent damage within Mythic Plus in general, because you're not always going to be cleaving like an unlimited amount of mobs at all times. Eventually it drops down to a handful of mobs, and in a lot of these dungeons, you are going to be doing some of the smaller pulls that you want to do as efficiently as possible, and Outlaw ends up excelling at those. In some of these encounters, you have to do only 2, 3, or 4 mobs, and Outlaw can actually be excellent at that by dropping a point of Ghost Strike, which technically reduces your single target damage a little, but picking up Precise Cuts makes you a monster, as Precise Cuts also got buffed up. For every target missing outside of your cap, which is usually 7 additional targets, for every target missing, you get 5% more damage on your Blade Flurry transfer, that single target cleaving on nearby targets, which means in 2, 3, or 4 target situations, you're just absolutely wrecking things, essentially almost like an arms warrior with a permanent sweeping strikes that hits everything around you. And with things such as underhanded upper hand, Blade Flurry duration, and Adrenaline Rush duration ends up being kind of huge, and you don't really need to refresh Blade Flurry that often. Blade Flurry can also build quite a few comp points with deft maneuvers, which can make it a little bit easier for you to generate all that resource economy. Killing Spree is back as an ability, and it will be mandatory to play Trickster. It is a bit of a kiss and a curse mechanic for Outlaw, but we'll come back to this playstyle and this ability and how to use it properly within AoE content in just a moment. Because I want to talk about Trickster and why it's finally viable, because previously it wasn't really all that good, but they buffed it up by quite a bit. The unseen blade damage buffed up by quite a decent number, so it's actually worth using for the most part. Surprising strikes damage on critical strikes on common point generators is actually also very good. Went up from 25% up to 50, making it very strong, and there's potential for some pistol shot builds or ambush heavy builds to do quite a lot of damage, and allows you for some crit damage scaling, which is really exciting. The buff to Blade Flurry amps it from 50% cleave to 75, so it makes it very strong as an AoE capability. It's just a very good playstyle, and Coup de Grace no longer has you charging and forcing you right at the target, which is also really nice. Killing Spree is a mandatory button, however. It is a bit weird, but it does proc a lot of the effects from Trickster, and it actually has quite a bit of cooldown reduction as part of the Trickster playstyle, especially with the Coup de Grace consuming additional common points, which they finally got functioning, I think, towards the tail end of Season 1, but actually can play and try it out and use it in Season 2, which is a lot of fun. But it is basically going to be a button that you'll want to use on cooldown. It has some RNG to how it can position you, depending where the tank positions the boss. Killing Spree can sometimes put you in an explosive effect or a frontal. Even though Killing Spree does delay the damage you take while spraying over 8 seconds, it can still put you in some hot water either way. But if you use it correctly and don't just throw it in when you're going to be using it in a dangerous situation, holding you back for a few globals isn't the worst as long as you can use it safely. And even being able to use it aggressively during constant AoE radial damage will actually make a healer thank you, because it allows you to smooth out the damage, allowing them to spend more time healing everybody else in the group, where you could take care of it yourself, go into Killing Spree, maybe follow with a feint to dampen some of the damage over time afterwards, and it just helps out with just overall your defenses. It's actually quite a fantastic button in the right situations. For Killing Spree, the priority is going to be basically like a cooldown, similar to Adrenaline Rush, similar to Vanishes. You shouldn't think of it as a finish or like a Between the Eyes or a Dispatch. It's kind of like above both of those. It's going to be highest priority ability for you whenever you have enough common points to send into a finisher. It is going to be higher priority than Subterfuge windows, but less important than maintaining Adrenaline Rush at all times. So you have to be very careful with it. Like, if Adrenaline Rush is about to fall off, Killing Spree ends up going on a back burner. It's better to vanish and prolong Adrenaline Rush for as long as possible. You'll use Killing Spree when Adrenaline Rush falls off, or if you're able to refresh it with a fresh new AR. Otherwise, you want to use Killing Spree on cooldown as much as possible. Trickster also has the Coup de Grace mechanic, where after so many unseen blades, you get a Coup de Grace, so you dispatch it to transform into a better version of it that has this like little animation to it, no longer locking you from generating common points or using abilities, which is super nice. But this basically, while for subtlety a priority ability, for Outlaw we just gotta use it as a normal dispatch. We ignore Coup de Grace for the most part, and even if you have Coup de Grace active, we will still rather use, at least right now, Killing Spree over Coup de Grace, even though it kind of would give us way too many stacks of Unseen Blade, almost cannibalizing Coup de Grace, but Killing Spree basically is that much more important as it deals significant bits of damage. Also, what's nice about Trickster is the permanent tricks within Mythic Plus. It's really nice. I still am using the cooldown for Trickster trade because I'm so used to it. Keep putting up on a tank whenever I can, but it's very nice and a bit of convenience. Trickster also has passive defenses, as while the enemy is phased, you take 5% less damage from them, depending if you play Smoke or if you play Mirrors. Smoke generally ends up being the better option, and with Killing Spree you can put up NC Blade on every target, so it gives you quite a decent bit of survivability. That's more passive rather than RNG/active-ish over as the Fate-bound playstyle. For this build, however, I would say tier set is nearly required, as the tier set 2 set allows us to gain buffs of winning streak, which we have like 98% uptime on. Basically, it increases the damage of our dispatch and does line up with the coup de grace capstone of Trickster, so technically can do more damage. Roll the Bones, also the 4 set is very important, has a 40% increased chance to grant us additional buffs whenever we roll, so more chances for 2 buffs and even more chances for 5 buffs. Also, for every stack that you get of buffs, you apply an additional stack of winning streak, increasing the damage of that winning streak for your dispatches to make it even better than ever before. And the damage of dispatches is actually quite significant, and it plays with Trickster really well, as you do spend a decent time dispatching, but with coup de grace getting amped by it also double dips in that value quite a decent bit, and that's very nice. But the Roll the Bones playstyle for Trickster and having that consistency of Roll the Bones being up all the time allows Trickster to really unleash a lot of killing sprees and a lot of overall damage, lots of comp point generation, and it just ends up making this playstyle really work. I would try to get your tier set as soon as possible before you really give Trickster a proper go. You can do it without it, but it really does spike up in value once you're able to get that tier set, as it synergizes really well with this playstyle. Speaking of the playstyle, you'll definitely want to check out the Discord guide for some of the very basics. Rotationally though, the Trickster playstyle in AoE is not too different than what you would normally play with Fatebound. You're still using the same comp point builders and spenders, and the priority of a lot of your cooldowns is about the same. The killing spree is going to be a button that you'll try to use as a highest priority unless Adrenaline Rush is about to fall off. So like I said before, AR uptime, Adrenaline Rush uptime is the highest in priority, then followed by killing spree, followed by subterfuge crackshot windows. Even if you're sitting on 2 charges of vanish and you want a vanish for subterfuge crackshot, it's still better just a killing spree. It is that good of an ability, and the more sprees you can use, the more hidden blades you can get, the more coup de grace you can get, so you just got a cyclical value that it all generates within the hero spec playstyle. This spec, however, does not generate as many comp points as Fatebound, which is something I noticed, as Fatebound has talents like Deal Fate, where Sinister Strike generates 1 additional comp point when it strikes an additional time. So if you are getting a lot of the double Sinister Strike hits, you actually would just generate so many comp points as Fatebound. With Trickster, you're not generating as many. You kind of are substituting that lack of generation for more broadside uptime with more Roll the Bones uptime, but you will notice yourself generating slightly less comp points on average with Trickster, which is something to get used to if you're so used to playing Fatebound after all this time. So that's something that you need to pay attention to. I have started using Blade Flurry more aggressively because it allows me to supplement those comp point not able to be generated as easily from Sinister Strikes. So it is something that you probably will start adjusting yourself as well within AoE content. Also, the coup de grace capstone for Trickster reads, if the primary target is phased when you hit him with a coup de grace, you gain 5 stacks of Flawless Form. Flawless Form increasing the damage of your finishers by 3% stacking, and those multiple applications may overlap. So if there are situations where, let's say, a boss is going to be vulnerable and take additional damage, if you can't somehow save a coup de grace to line it up with a big burst window, like maybe 5 to 10 seconds maximum, then it could be a little bit more value because it gives you like a little burst window. It's not going to be as impactful as like Subtlety Rogue, where you would actually delay it by quite a decent bit because the payoff is that much more worth it. But if you try to squeeze out the most amount of damage, it does give Outlaw a little bit of a burst window. So another thing that we should talk about is the Roll the Bones mechanic. With the tiers that we have right now, we have a much higher chance to roll the bones and get a 2 buff and a 5 buff combo. Then we also have Sleight of Hand that also increases the chances of us getting 2 buff and a 5 buff. Our chances of getting a Soul Lone buff by itself is about 18%. It's like a 64% chance to get a 2 buff and a 17% chance to get a 5 buff. Previously 5 buff, and I just rolled a 5 buff just now, which is crazy, but it's pretty regular though. A 5 buff used to be about a 1%, if not 2% chance to roll a 5 God buff, but now it's 17, so your chances of getting a really good set of buffs and then prolonging with Keep It Rolling so the last an eternity feels like it just makes the playstyle so good. It speeds up the gameplay, gives you a lot of cooldown reduction, lots more crits, more combo points, more pistol shot procs, and it's just kind of an insane tier set. It's probably one of the best ones we've had in a very long while. But it also makes us want to gamble, to the point where we roll the bones when we have 2 or less buffs. because 2 buff is not worth it. It's a pretty high chance to get a 2 buff. So you might as well reroll, because you're probably going to roll into another 2 buff combo, because you're almost guaranteed 2 buffs. This way you can take advantage of Supercharger, as well as the 4 set bonus that increases the damage of our dispatches up to 60% damage increase, which is kind of nuts too. When you do get extra buffs from things like your count the odds, they do count as an extra buff. So if you see 3 buffs, even if one has like a handful of seconds on it, don't re-roll until the buff falls off completely. So whenever you have Roll the Bones are back up and available and you're only sitting on 2 buffs, roll it. Otherwise, don't roll it. And it's pretty easy to do with the weak aura that we have over in our Discord section. You can get the weak aura there that basically helps you maintain Roll the Bones and makes it much easier for you to know exactly when you should roll and when you shouldn't roll. And having a weak aura, well, I'm somebody who doesn't run a lot of weak auras when I play my classes. A weak aura for Roll the Bones can really take away a lot of the headache if you hate the RNG of Roll the Bones as a mechanic but still want to experience Outlaw. I really would recommend running that weak aura. It's simple. It just shows up an icon of Roll the Bones whenever it needs to be re-rolled. So if you get the weak aura from the online guide, definitely should check it out on Discord, but it'll be Roll the Bones, and it's technically set up for patch 11.05 with the thought process behind which buffs are better. It has a bunch of weights for these buffs. As soon as you open the weak aura, go to the trigger tab and hit expand. It's going to give you a lot of code. Lots of it looks very maybe complicated if this is the first time you've seen it. Just scroll all the way down. At the very bottom, there's going to be a section here where total buffs. Normally, the way that the weak aura is set up originally is it would have equals and then 0 at the end. If total buffs equals 0, it tells you to roll. With a simple adjustment, we change that 0 to a 3. And instead of double equals, we just take them away and do a less than sign. This is where it will just tell you to re-roll when you have 2 or less buffs. If you have 2 plus like a passive one from Count the Odds, it'll count as 3 buffs, and then it won't yell at you to re-roll. Otherwise, it'll just show up as an icon on your screen. And more or less, this is what it will look like. You can just set it up and change it where you want it to go. It just shows up the icon of Roll the Bones. It just takes away the whole like thought process of Roll the Bones and the difficulty and try to figure out if you should keep the current buffs, if you should re-roll a lot of them. It's just an easy adjustment that will have you re-rolling your buffs every time you have 2 or less. But overall, this change, together with the Trickster and the new tiers of bonus, makes this pack feel incredibly fast-paced and super hyper-efficient, I would even say, at cleaving smaller groups. And there are a couple of encounters in dungeons where you do have to fight only a handful of mobs. You can pull extra, and Outlaw ends up being insanely competitive in those situations. You're not going to be incredible at like the first pull of the brewery, the Cinder Meadery dungeon, because there's going to be a lot of enemies you're pulling, but the rest of the dungeon, as you go through the hallways and have to do smaller pulls, you're going to catch up so fast. And there's so many dungeons where situations like that exist. Maybe not in dungeons like Priory, because there's quite a decent bit of big pulls that you could do in Priory specifically, but just about every other dungeon within the season, you can get some meaningful damage. You also do big priority damage as an Outlaw Rogue, as you mostly do single target damage that just has free cleave splash damage to nearby targets. This means that you're going to be able to take out priority targets and be more impactful than a lot of the classes out there that just do pad AoE damage. And while damage is damage, when you have pad damage against the non-threatening enemies, it doesn't actually impact the dungeon. It doesn't actually improve the chances of your success. When there's an enemy that, let's say, does a bunch of different casts, and your team can live for like 2 of them, but a third one is definitely going to give you guys limping or potentially cause a death, which will mean you lose timer on the key. Having that priority damage is highly valued by so many players with an M+. And Outlaw literally has it in spades, where other classes can technically do damage that doesn't really matter in a long haul of it. Outlaw has that zeroed in focus damage that many are looking forward to. I will say that this playstyle, at first, it did feel like it's a lot for me to track, between killing spree, between coup de grace, between not being able to generate as many common points as I normally do as Fatebound. It doesn't mean that I'm looking to track things a little bit more evenly, but this is why I really highly recommend running, at the very least, a Roll the Bones weak aura. It really takes away a lot of the thought process of when you should roll, when you shouldn't roll, because the entire playstyle of Roll the Bones becomes so simple because of the tier set, because of the way Trickster functions, that it's just very simplistic, and it allows allows you to take some of the cognitive load and then worry about killing spree. Think about coup de grace, think about your comp point generation, and have more in the moment type of gameplay. Not everybody enjoys running with weak auras, but I feel like the Roll the Bones one is a must-have. If you hate the RNG of Roll the Bones, but still want to enjoy Outlaw Rogue, I think the weak aura really helps solve a lot of those issues for you so easily. Overall, I am having a lot of fun with this version of Outlaw in particular. I thought that the spec wasn't getting a lot of changes, but with the tier set, with the Trickster playstyle, it's a ton of fun. The damage you put out can be quite insane, especially in some of the smaller dungeon pulls, and it definitely has some weight when it comes to certain encounters just absolutely dominating in a lot of the different environments that are available for Season 2, and I've been having such a good time with it. If you've ever wanted to check out Outlaw Rogue, especially when it comes to dungeon content, which is the cleave playstyle is what the spec has always been known for, and that's always what it's been good for. Right now, I would really give this version of Trickster Outlaw Rogue, once you get your tier set and a little bit of haste and gear, this one is an easy recommend for me right now. It has been a ton of fun, especially if you're looking for someone new and fresh from the class of Rogue. But with that being said, as always, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this little guide. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. And if you want to see more guides like these in the future, or if you're wanting specific guides on rogues within Season 2, hit up the Discord and let me know directly. That's probably the best place to reach me. Plus, the best place to hang out with the community discussing all of the newest changes as soon as they get announced for Season 2, as well likely we'll be getting a lot more patch changes and tuning adjustments for the season. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.